So I'll invite Carol and Ammi-Joan up in a second. Or come up now. Come on up now. Yeah. Come on up now. Come on up now. Sorry. Snow brain. So my name is Deborah Kovacs. I'm going to join them, sitting beside them after I just do a little bit of formal introduction. I am Senior Vice President of Walden Media. Been at Walden for 13 and a half years, so been there for many of our book-to-film adaptation projects. Two of my colleagues from Walden are here tonight, Randy Testa and Noel Dalbarlo, who also are probably, I've invited them to chime in as will be helpful to us all. Really pleased, I'm really sorry first to say that our third panelist, Nikki Silver, unfortunately could not make it up from New York today. She's really not well. She's under the weather and just could not possibly make the trip. So I apologize for the fact that we were going to have 4 of us and we're going to have 3 of us, but we will all speak to the topics that she would have helped us address. So I'm going to first introduce Ammi-Joan Paquette, who is a senior agent at Erin Murphy Literary Agency on the left, or your right, my left. She represents all forms of children's and young adult literature, a number of which are currently on their way to the big and small screen. These include E's forthcoming March 15th series, The Royals. You've probably seen advertisements for that. It looks pretty juicy. Based on Michelle Ray's Falling for Hamlet, who is her client. She's also looking forward to her client Jean Ryan's Nerve, which is being developed by Lionsgate, starring Emma Roberts and Dave Franco for feature film. And Jennifer Nielsen's The False Prince, currently in scripting stage for Paramount Pictures by the Game of Thrones story editor Brian Cogman. And Joan is also the author of numerous novels and picture books for young readers, including Paradox, Nowhere Girl, Rules for Ghosting, and the forthcoming Princess Juniper of the Hourglass. And to her right is Carol Greenwald, who is Senior Executive Producer at WGBH. We were running a reel, for those who were here a little bit ahead of time, of a lot of the great projects she's been involved with over the years. She has produced some of the best-loved children's shows on television. She's co-creator and executive producer for the multiple Emmy and Peabody Award-winning Arthur, now the longest-running children's animated series on television. That's pretty cool. She is also currently executive producer for 2 other series on PBS Kids, Curious George, which premiered on PBS in the fall 2006, and is now one of the top-rated series for kids 2 to 5, and Martha Speaks, based on the books by Susan Medaw, which premiered fall 2008, and supports the development of oral vocabulary. She also developed and produced Postcards from Buster, the Arthur spinoff that premiered on PBS in the fall of 2004, and Time Warp Trio, based on the popular book series by John Cheska, which aired on the Discovery Kids block on NBC in 2005 and 2006. In her capacity as executive producer of these series, Greenwald oversees the development and production of the television programs and supervises ancillary activities such as the website and educational outreach. And since I'm going to now be participating as a panelist as well as moderating the panel, I will fill in the pieces of the background that I represent. My work at Walden Media has to do with I have 2 hats. I work in acquisitions for our imprint, which we co-publish with HarperCollins, which is called Walden Pond Press, which is a middle grade children's book imprint. We've published about 40 books over the last 7 or 8 years with them. So I am actively involved in the middle grade children's space, reviewing projects both for our publication and also potentially for film adaptation by Walden Media. And my other hat, whenever we are involved in a film adaptation project, we most recently collaborated extensively with Houghton Mifflin on The Giver. Excuse me. Oh. With Houghton Mifflin on the, said that right, looking right at Betsy. We recently had a wonderful collaboration with Houghton Mifflin on The Giver, and also last year, which was a film that we also worked on with Nikki Silver, who was the lead producer on that. We also worked with Nikki Silver a year and a half ago on The Watsons Go to Birmingham, based on the great classic award-winning book by Christopher Paul Curtis. So I'm going to speak to our process in adaptation of those 2 projects, and I'm going to also invite my colleague Randy to speak a little bit about that because he was very involved in the script and adaptation of Watsons Go to Birmingham. So I'm going to step away from here. Now, is the mic on? Is it on? Oh yeah, okay. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. So we're going to have a series of questions, but I do encourage you, if we come on something that you'd like to just ask a little bit more about, please don't hesitate to raise your hands. We welcome that. But I'm going to start out by asking each of you how you came to be involved in the world of children's books, and specifically in the area of book adaptation. So, Joan, do you want to start?
Can you hear me? Okay. I came about children's books through the author side. I was an author first, so I was writing. From there, I moved into agenting, and in our agency, we pretty much stick strictly to the text rights. You know, we sell the book side of things, and we work in conjunction with a sub-agent in Hollywood. So my role isn't especially hands-on with regards to the film, but having been on the sort of the edge of things and watching the different projects move along their way has been fascinating, and it has been I feel like it's very much informed my agenting process and my approach to the text, not in the sense that I would do anything differently, but my awareness and my understanding of how the visual side is affected and how the media elements are viewed has been a very interesting part of informing the process of the publication and the print side of things as well.
Carol?
So I've been at WGBH for a really long time, and I was lucky enough to be there when there was a decision made that it was time to kind of reinvest in the children's programming area, and I was really excited about that because it was something I was very interested in doing. And one of the things that happened is that we found some research at that point that had been done by Action for Children's Television, which was an organization formed by Peggy Charon, who died recently. You may have seen her obituary. And she did this research that showed that kids who watch television based on books were more likely to read those books. They found also that kids were potentially also more likely to go to the library and ask for those books. And so it seemed like a fabulous opportunity to use the medium of television to encourage reading. And so we kind of started from there, and that's what got me going on these children's book adaptations.
And I would add that basically Walden Media just took a page out of the WGBH playbook. And when we were established in 2000, 2001, we wanted to find the best way to we also are a literacy company, a literacy organization, and our commitment was to find the best way to get kids to read great stories. And it was our thought that making faithful adaptations of great books would be a great way to lead kids to the books. And that's a bumpy path, but that was always the intention, and that we've gotten there. We've hit that mark a lot of times. So that would be, I got involved because I love children's books, and I've been involved in children's books and children's media my entire career. And when I learned about the work of Walden Media, I knew that I could help form a bridge between the book adaptations, the authors themselves, the publishers, the educational market, and the filmmaking. So I joined early on to help create that bridge, and that's been heart and soul of what we've done ever since. I also want to invoke a friend of many of ours in this room, Lois Lowry, who has said that a faithful film adaptation is one that is true to the spirit of the book. So I'm going to put that out there as a little marker for our conversation today, and then we will reflect back on it as we go through our conversation, because I think it's evident that they can't be the same thing. And we're talking about feature film, we're talking about television, we're talking about a 120-page script based on a 500-page book. We're talking about executives who don't read whatsoever, perhaps, in a film company, who want to pull out the high moments that we might see or might not see in our projects, in our books that we're loving so much. So that's a quote I want us to keep in the back of our minds as we go forward tonight. Carol, this is one for you. How did you decide on Arthur, Curious George, Time Warp? What made you decide that those were going to be Scars from Buster, all the projects you've been involved in? How did you hit on those? Martha Speaks.
Well, they all had different evolutions, and Arthur, they kind of share one thing. They share some things about it, but each of them we came to a little differently. The first series I did was called Long Ago and Far Away, and that was a series of classic children's stories from around the world. And it was all this fabulous animation we found. And we loved doing that series because it was kind of like masterpiece theater for kids. But unfortunately, it did not get much of an audience. It was very disappointing, and we went back in and we did some research and we looked at the numbers, and we figured out that actually the problem is that kids really need a familiar cast of characters. They want something they can come back to over and over again, and that having that change every week just wasn't working for them. So then we said, okay, let's look for a book series that has the capacity to give us this long-term relationship with kids. And I tell you, we did everything. We went to the library, we talked to teachers, we did the research, but really, of course, the way it happened was someone gave my son, who was 3 at the time, Arthur's Tooth. And we read it, and then we read it again, and we read it again, and it was one of those books that I didn't want to throw under the couch cushions so that I wouldn't have to look at it again. So, it was just kind of the right mix. And then actually, it turned out Mark Brown was coming to our local library, so I went to that event, and there he was, and boy, he was like a rock star. So it was kind of meant to be. So I called him up. He was like, yes, I want to do this. So it's not always that easy, but that was kind of how Arthur came about.
Some projects are kind of have a lucky star over them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one, yeah. And
Meant to
you
be.
probably, it sounds like you probably also realized, I really can relate as a parent to that tossing the book under the couch thing,
Right.
but you recognized that the characters were solid enough.
Yes,
had dimension. So you
exactly.
would say characters having dimension,
Right.
characters having variety.
And I would also say authenticity, which I know is something that every writer strives for. But it is, it came through so well in Arthur in terms of the relationships. And it was also something that was there that we could build on. And so it was something I'd also been reading about with literacy, which was kids really connect to books that have that feeling of authenticity. It doesn't matter whether it's fiction or fact or fantasy, but it just has to have that.
And would you say that the other major projects you've been involved with, matched those criteria?
I would definitely say, yes, I would. I think I've been very lucky in that all the projects I've worked on we've had like these wonderful properties to work with. And they've all had some kind of spark, something that has allowed us. We were lucky enough that Houghton Mifflin brought us into Curious George. That was, thank you, Mary Gorman, who's not here. But that was such a wonderful thing for us, and of course, who can not want to work with that little monkey? It's Martha Speaks. I'd talked to Susan many years ago. She hadn't been interested at the time. She came back. I think it was one of those things where you plant seeds and then
you have to be patient.
You have to be patient.
I think we would all agree that this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Every aspect of this.
I would agree, and I think that makes me think of a point that there's sort of, I feel like there's a perception sometimes of, okay, I've written a book or I've published a book, and let's shop the film rights. And not that doesn't happen, because certainly it can happen that way, and particularly if you're Veronica Roth and you have your new book coming out, or certain very high-profile properties, yes, you're going to market them around. But I think by and large, and certainly my experience with our projects that have been optioned, it's more a case of the right reader connecting with the material at the right time in a similar way. And quite often, almost always, it'll be after it's published. Sometimes it'll be a good deal of time after it's published. And again, sometimes you get interest from the deal announcement, and somebody will say, hey, send it to me. But even then, you're usually going to wait until you have closer to a finished product, because you want to make the executives time, you want to maximize the reach and send them something that is not, pre-revision, or, here's my copy,
So patience is a
yeah,
virtue.
so it's a process, and it is very much a factor of luck and timing too, being in the right place at the right time. You have to create the great materials, but then once they're there, it's almost.
So tell us of the 3 projects that you've got proceeding now. Choose your favorite and describe how you went as the agent. What was your experience as the agent? Take any one of the 3.
As far as the film?
Well, so you have this book, You could
Yes.
choose whichever book you want to talk about. How did you bring it to, who noticed it? How was it noticed? What did you do?
Well, so Nerve is going. That's the one that's in development with Lionsgate, and this one was after it was published. So it was already in print.
Tell us what it's about.
Okay, so it's a YA thriller based on a girl who is invited to play a game called Nerve, an online game that's like Truth or Dare, but without the truth. So it's basically a series of escalating dares that you perform on your smartphone before an increasing number of watchers. And you can sign up to be a watcher, or you can sign up to be a dare, and it taps into your the Facebook equivalent, and so if the character who succeeds at their dare and gets an audience wins prizes and so on. But as the character proceeds through this labyrinth, the darker side is revealed. So when I first read this manuscript and first started sending out, the first thing I thought of was the Michael Douglas movie, The Game, which some of you may have seen, and it very much made me think of that in teen version. So to me, it had that cinematic quality. But again, it wasn't until later when the book was published, we actually had somebody approach us saying, and this was not the people who ended up optioning it, but it was, a fairly prominent movie actress was like, I read this book and I love it and I wanna option it. And at the same time, our film agent had sent it out to someone else and had several other people reading it, and so we ended up with several people who were interested in. So she actually was able to review several offers. But I think that first interest was kind of what sparked the fuse a little bit and kind of got the visibility going. And then from there, things progressed fairly quickly.
So, what do you think about, in both instances, again, you're coming from different perspectives. I assume that you haven't had much access to script, or have you had much access to the script?
Not much. It really depends on the production crew. So
Yeah.
in some cases we have reviewed, they sent us the script to review, they sent the author and sort of asked her for her opinion. Other ones have not been in contact at all. So it's something that as an author becoming involved in film rights, you should expect to just sort of hand over the reins, and then you hope that there'll be some involvement, and there may be, and likely there will be, but at that point it really is, you're sort of saying, okay, here's my baby, but it's going to be in good hands, it's going to be well cared for, and you just kind of pass it on.
And do you have to counsel your authors about that to a certain
Yeah,
extent?
I mean, we
Yeah.
say that up front, and I've talked to, I know authors, and I've talked to authors of other agents who are not comfortable with that. And they know that up front, and they say, you know what, I'm not going to option my film the rights to my book because I am not comfortable having control, or I'm going to wait until I get the type of offer that I can have creative control. And I think that's very rare to get that from the get-go. Almost always there's going to be some collaborative understanding, but I think it would be, they never want to put that in writing. You don't ever want to be obligated to bring the author in, because also authors differ, and some, are more demanding than others, and you don't want to be in a creative position where you're then hamstrung and have someone dictating you that is outside of your field. So in the end, as an author, you bring your perspective, you've created the book, but the way the visual medium is represented, it's a very different animal, and you have to be aware of that coming from the print side and say, okay, well, maybe that's not the way I would have done it, but that's what's required.
Carol, can you speak to this from the other point of view?
Well, I think the thing to be really aware of is that the television series is not the book. If you think about what a picture book is, it's how many pages. Sometimes it's 16, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But, and how many of those stories are there, and how much detail is in there. And then you think, okay, for the first season of this television series, we're going to make 40 half hours, which is going to be actually 80 stories. And we're going to need to create backstories for these characters. When we started Arthur, No one knew that what kind of job mom had or dad, Mr. Reed, no one knew he was a caterer. You had to kind of come up with this stuff because in a television program, you need that level of detail to be able to have these stories play out. So what I think the bottom line is, you have to have a willingness to be part of a team. You have to be able to collaborate. You have to be able to say, okay, I am excited about what the possibility is of expanding the world that my characters live in, and you're someone I'd like to collaborate with to do that. And I think it is important for you to feel like, you're not. If this is important to you, it is important for you to feel like you have some sense of who the person is you're handing it over to, and that you like what they've done before, and you feel they respect your work, but you do have to recognize that it's going to completely change your relationship to what you created.
It's really important to recognize that. I mean, I would like to actually invite my colleague Randy to join a portion of this conversation right now, because he was very involved in our adaptation of The Watsons Go to Birmingham last year, a year and a half ago, which Nikki Silver, who would have been here tonight, was the producer on. But I would love you, Randy, if you don't mind, to speak for a couple of minutes about going from what the book was to how the book needed to open up in order to make it to film. Why don't you come right up here? It'd be easy. Thanks.
How many people here have, read The Watsons Go to Birmingham? Okay. So the book was published in 1995. That is, 20 years ago, which in the story of a children's book is a long time ago given social media. So we found out that we were going to be doing Watsons Go to Birmingham at the beginning of 2013. 2013 marks the 50th anniversary of the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church. The Watsons Go to Birmingham, as you know, the Watsons, because Byron is driving the parents crazy, they take Byron and the family go from Flint, Michigan to Birmingham, Alabama, so that Byron will be taught some manners by his grandmother, Grandma Sands. The bombing occurs in the novel. It happens, and the family go back to Michigan, and there's an epilogue at the end of the book that talks about racism being bad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a quick, perfunctory summary of the book, so forgive me. To do this project in 2013, and then as we began moving on the project, we found out, I was very involved with the city of Birmingham, and the city of Birmingham did a week-long commemoration called 50 Years Forward. And we asked if we could bring the movie as the centerpiece to that commemoration. We found that out in May. We actually found that out on May 2nd, I was in Birmingham on May 2nd, the 50th anniversary of the Children's March. And just as I was on my way to the mayor's office, 3 6th grade classrooms were coming across Kelly Ingram Park. Now I'm telling you that because it was impossible for us as we saw it to do the novel the way it was written in the year 2013. It's a fabulous novel. It's one of my favorite novels. But with the imminence of the 50th anniversary of the Children's March, the 50th anniversary of the bombing of 16th Street, so our screenwriter was Nikki Silver's partner, Tanya Lewis-Lee, whose husband Spike did the extraordinary documentary Four Little Girls. How many have seen Four Little Girls? You have to see Four Little Girls. You have to see Four Little Girls. I'll say it one more time. You have to see Four Little Girls. You have to. How many people here saw Selma? Oh, shame on you. Anyway, and I'm saying this because I'm talking about historical and artistic context for a work to come up as a film. So one of the things that Tanya Lee did in her adaptation of Watsons was really add to the story that as the Watsons are traveling from Flint, they start to hear on the radio, they start to hear history. They just before they leave, they see on a television George Wallace saying, "And I say to you, segregation now, segregation tomorrow," etc. And Kenny sees that on the television and asks his mother, "Is that where we're going?" So the movie, unlike the book, has a foreshadowing of what's going to be happening in Birmingham. And the other piece that it has is that when the Watsons get to Birmingham, they meet their cousins, not in the book, and their cousins were involved, so it takes them a while. They get down there, I'm going to say, in about midsummer. And Byron and Kenny and Joetta's cousins were at the Children's March, you know, guard dogs and fire hoses, the footage that enraged the nation. So that was added to this. So our movie is much more rooted in the context of what was going on in 1963. So with that then comes another interesting problem. You know, Victor Fleming directed Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz at the same time. And he took over, he had to jump in the middle of The Wizard of Oz. And so one day they were filming and they were 4 hours behind. They couldn't find the lead monkey. And so they ran around and they were little people, what we would today call little people, a huge 200 little people. So they couldn't find the lead dressed up monkey. And they finally found him drunk in the bathroom, passed out. And so Victor Fleming was sitting in his director's chair and he said, "Problems make a picture more interesting." And that is true with Watson's, is my point, is that these problems, how to present this story within a context, within an historical context. So with that came then, with the original script we had, the last thing was that there was no narrator. We were just watching things happen. And so with the addition of this powerful historic context, we said the only way the audience is going to get through this story is through a lot of humor, which sounds paradoxical or counterintuitive. So Kenny's voice narrates the story, and much of Kenny's narration actually comes right out of the book. And then the last thing I want to say that's very important in a movie, to establish the credibility of the narrator, Kenny, whose voiceover we're going to hear. There's a scene in the book when Kenny stands up, if you remember, and recites Langston Hughes. Do you remember this? Well, so I'm going to ask you, why would that be important to be in the movie? Oh, come on. Yeah.
Establishes that he has good memory.
Yes, more than good memory.
It's a knowledge of African American.
Thank you. Yes, this is a reliable witness to history. You see? I mean, this has to be so. So not only do we, so Tanya says, let's have him stand up and read this. And what he reads in the book, in the movie, is not in the novel. He reads, it makes me cry, "Let America be America again." And so we know that we have a witness in this movie who is reliable, who can see history as it's unfolding, you see? So this is what goes into this. And I get worked up because since then, we've been working with the city of Birmingham now for 3 years. I'm about to go off to Selma because the mayor's office is coordinating the 50th anniversary of Selma. So that's where this stuff can lead.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate it. As you can see, that was a very powerful project and a real privilege for all of us to be involved with it. And I'm really glad to say on that project, we really won the favor and understanding of Christopher Paul Curtis. He was fabulously supportive of the approach that we took. He was very involved. That's going back to what we were talking about before. In our case, it is a hallmark. We haven't been able to accomplish it all the time, but it is always our North Star whenever we take on an adaptation. You have to be careful because you don't want to overpromise, as the points we're making here. But at the same time, it's extraordinarily invaluable. If you're hitting the right marks with the adaptation, it's unbelievably invaluable to have the author involved. We experienced with The Giver, we had once the movie was put together, there were issues. Test audiences weren't understanding some of the context because of the way the film presented. Lois Lowry, with incredible generosity, participated in creating voiceover narration which helped clarify and bring home a lot of the main points. And you can't have that type of unbelievable opportunity if you don't keep that door open. So, and you say to yourself, why option it in the first place if you don't want to love it and love the creator of it? So we got emotional here because we care about this work. We care about this work because we all recognize there is a small canon of really powerful and works that really have to be treated with unbelievable respect. And I think all of us would agree with that. And you representing the author's point of view and protecting them, and both of us representing the end product, it's very, very important. I was going to take a segue. Does anybody have any questions on that aspect of this process that we're talking about? Because we'll have more questions later, but if anybody wants to ask a question about faithful adaptation, or how broadly can you rebuild something if you want to, it's fine if we don't have a question, but I just thought I'd leave this. I was calling the next section "Making Sausage," which is what a lot of times what we call the making of movies. It's and television shows, I presume. Maybe your sausage patties because they're smaller. It can be gnarly. It's a gnarly process. One thing I wanted to ask Carol to talk about is, and maybe it may or may not work as well with a series as it does with a film, but well, let me put it this way: when we approach a film project and we approach creative talent to work with us on the film project, the first thing we're looking for is for them to present a take, which means what are the five, basically the way I think of it is, what are the 5 or 6 things you think are the most important about this story, and how are you gonna bring that forward? Does that reflect your experience as well?
Absolutely. We might not do it in quite so specific a context because we're looking at something much more broad.
Right.
But we would look at this thing, we're like, what are the essential qualities of this property that make it so appealing to kids, so appealing to us? What is it about the relationship between DW and Arthur? Or what is it about the monkey that kids just love? Why is that monkey so appealing? Or the talking dog. Why is that talking dog so charming and so funny? And to be able to think about it and what that means. So, with Martha, we always thought, well, the whole idea here that's so great is that Martha is a dog, but she's talking, but she really is a dog. Everything she sees is from a dog point of view. So when we look for writers and people who worked on the show, almost all of them actually had dogs.
That's funny.
It was a funny thing, and in fact, when we went to the animation studio we eventually chose, there happened to be dogs there because they let people bring their dogs to work. And so it was like, yes, you understand that we really want this to be done from a dog's point of view.
Yeah.
And that might be, that kind of, it's not quite as lofty as coming up with the Watsons Go to Birmingham, but it's what is this essential idea that underlies this, that makes it what it is. That makes it true. And so that's what we do look for in every series we worked on.
And talk about how you apply, when you're doing animations based on illustrated children's books, of course you have the palette of illustrations, of course
Right.
you have that to work with, but then you've got to, again, really exponentially expand the world.
Really broaden. Well, it was actually, when we worked on Curious George, it was a really great example because, there's 6 original Curious George stories, and in those stories, there's not a lot of identified characters. But to create, the broad group of characters to be able to, continue to sustain a series, we had to think, okay, where are we going to find these? And of course, we didn't have authors to talk to at that point. We didn't have, all we really had was, we have the books right there. So the head writer for that, who's a brilliant guy named Joe Fallon, basically went through every illustration in those books and looked for what's reappearing over and over again. And here was like the doxy that showed up over and over and over again in the back. And then we found, by talking to Anita Silvey, who was the Ray's editor, we found out that they actually had a doxy that they loved. So This is how we created the character of Hundley, who really has become one of the really most wonderful characters in the show. I think that and plays such a great foil for George. We looked there. There's a cat, in the background. The doorman appears in different places. The scientist. We looked for what we could find in those books that was already there and that we could build on.
And that is also truth.
Yeah.
You're expanding. The truth was sketchy because they didn't think those things all the way through because that wasn't what they were doing.
Well, and the other thing that was interesting to me about it was that, of course, everything I do has to have an educational curriculum to it, and that's not always like is just literacy or. And in this case, we were looking at it. We were talking about what we should do, and happened to be talking to a woman who was working on preschool science, and she said to me, "George is an engineer." I mean, can't you see it? He's taking things apart, he's putting them back together, he's using tools. He's an engineer. This is where you have to really start. And so it was just so perfect because it was there. And then, of course, later we found that Hans Ray was so interested in science and that he was so interested in, there's a book on astronomy, which I've always loved.
Me too.
So that, that was just a wonderful kind of coming together. And I think that's how, when it works.
Did you
that's
feel
what
you were ever
happens.
in dialogue with him and his wife, in a sense, even though they had passed away?
Well,
Because you were getting so absorbed in their material?
I think I'm not sure I would say we were in dialogue, but I think we were really trying to get everything we could that they'd left, the clues that they'd left in their books.
It's really
And
cool.
and we do research, and we do spend a lot of time thinking about those things.
Yeah. It's really
I think that's fascinating to hear that because I can picture a child who maybe is introduced through the television series first and then goes back to the book, then finding those details and saying, look, there's the doorman
breadcrumbs.
that we got to know.
Right.
And, I feel like it makes for so much of a richer experience when you have that level, that respect for the source material, which I think is really, it stands
And
out.
the source material, in my experience, what I've observed is some source doesn't hold up to that pounding.
Yeah.
Some source,
That's true.
you're working really hard on it, and you want it to be right, but it just falls apart. It falls apart in your hands when you're working on it. It can happen, and it can happen for a million reasons. It can happen because of the creative, the collaboration that's been established might not be the right collaboration. It can happen because the material itself just somehow, I'll never forget, will not speak of what project it was, but a number of years ago we worked on a project where I realized halfway through that the piece that we were adapting wasn't strong enough to survive this process. And I remember realizing it and just going, oh well. And I was only a team member. I wasn't the person that was fundamentally responsible for it, but I watched the creative team try to inject into this what wasn't there, and they also had the wrong vibe. They weren't doing it. They weren't, even what there was that wasn't enough there, this team was pulling it farther and farther and farther or farther away until you couldn't recognize it at the end. And it's sort of like, wow, you just want to get rid of that thing, but you can't, because then by then you've invested time, resources, and so forth and so on. But it really has been my observation that certain projects don't cross that fence very well, unfortunately. And it's hard on the original project, on the original source when that happens. That can be a problem.
I'll say too that that's another case where, when the author's available, where speaking with the author can be helpful.
Right.
Absolutely.
In the case of The False Prince, which is still in a fairly early stage, it's the middle grade series, which is now all the way out. But at the time that it was first optioned, and the scriptwriter began working on the script, the first one was published, I think, and she was writing the second one. And so he was very collaborative, and I think they had lunch together, and we're talking things over, and he would ask questions like, okay, what if we bring in this other character? Because again, the scriptwriter is thinking cinematically, and Jennifer Nielsen, the author, was very understanding of that process, and she was like, she was happy to be involved, but she didn't want to, she understood that it would be a different beast, but at the same time, he was anxious to make sure that the changes that he was making would resonate. And so he brought in a suggestion, what if we did this with this character? And she was like, oh, well, actually, in book 2, this is going to happen, and so how about it? So they were basically able to collaborate in a sense where she provided him with information about what was going to come, so that he wasn't painting himself into a corner with a script that then ended up going in a wildly different direction. So having that kind of dialogue is also helpful in a forward-thinking kind of a way.
And another thing to think about, and I don't know if this is the case in your circumstance, but it's certainly been my experience. When you watch the credits at the end of a movie, they go on for hours because there's so many people involved. And about the first top half of those people all have opinions. Maybe everybody has opinions, but
You have to listen to the top half.
you have to listen to everybody. But that can create, in an adaptation, that can create a disconnect sometimes. Not always, hopefully never, but sometimes. And that's an interesting part of the process as well. And even the screenwriter that you're describing, as you were describing that to me, I was saying to myself, well, I'm really glad to hear about that collaboration. I hope it survived after he turned in his draft and the studio got involved.
The script is now sort of mired in script land, but we're waiting to see how it.
That's
because
the
again,
dreaded,
there's a lot of people that weigh in, and from script writing to approval.
And
to,
in their defense, they're putting up a whole lot of money. So
Yeah, exactly.
It
has to. You want a lot of eyes on it because the end result, it has to weather.
But it is
the process.
extraordinarily different for an author who works in solitude to be subject to this other, which is why so often it is best for some personalities just to take a step back. For some personalities, again, I refer to The Giver, which was in development for 19 years in one form or another, and poor Lois Lowry took more lunches with bright-eyed people that were hoping to make this perfect movie for her than she probably would like to remember. But you have to be just, again, as I said at the beginning, patient with the process, and also hope that at the end of the day, the people that you end up finally collaborating with are just going to resonate with your material and respect your material. So, yeah.
So that author that you're talking about, in process writing the series as the script was being developed, was there ever a point at which in the later books she had to work with material that had been introduced in the script? Was there ever
We'll repeat your question. Her question is, did the author have to
Did she change anything?
her subsequent second and third volume of
Yeah.
the series?
to work with what was being introduced in the movie?
Yeah, I don't know that it ever got to that point because I think, and again, the scriptwriter also had his, he has his he's sort of doing that in his part-time. So the author's finishing of the books progressed a lot more quickly than the script did. So I feel like they had that initial conversation so that she kind of clarified to him where she was taking the story. And then beyond that, I don't think that the direction of the script had any effect on the subsequent books.
But it certainly happens with television.
Yes.
Because with,
So long.
it's because you've got this very long thing going, and if someone, and the next time you write a book, you can pretend that what's happened on television doesn't have an impact on your books, but if you do, you're kind of making kids feel a little cheated.
Yeah,
so you have to kind
that's
of
complicated.
bear in mind that, okay, I want to think about how we've developed and evolved the elements of these stories, and then I want to make sure that I don't contradict it. I might not have to use everything that's in the TV show, but I don't want to contradict it.
So for example, you've got this caterer who didn't
Didn't
right.
have a job before.
So did Mark have? Well, maybe don't speak to that specifically, but
Well,
how
I
did that
think
play out?
for example, there have been characters that in Arthur, because now it's almost 20 seasons, so we've made over 200 episodes. So every character, we've created a whole range of new characters who now have all kinds of very developed lives. So they do now appear. Mark wrote a new book 2 years ago. He hasn't done a lot of new books, but when he does, he has to kind of bear in mind that, he can't necessarily ignore the brain or Fern or, Sue Ellen,
And did he have any part in helping you develop this character?
absolutely.
So
He
then
was,
that-
he was part of the conversation.
So that
yeah.
makes it perfect.
And he
Yeah.
continues to be part of the conversation.
That's perfect, yeah. Randy, did you have something you wanted to say?
I just wanted to sort of flip that and talk about the audience and what they do to this process, because that's the process of what happens. When we did Charlotte's Web, do you mind if I do just for a quick? People said, oh my God, Charlotte's Web, you can't touch Charlotte's Web. They made that terrible movie with Paul Lynde playing the voice of Templeton and Debbie Reynolds singing those songs. You can't, this is sacrilege. This is a book that can't be made into a movie. Well, actually, E.B. White had a lot to say. So when we started to work on this project, we found that E.B. White had said a lot about the process of going from the book to the screen. And E.B. White, some 62 years ago, prefigured what we today call CGI animation. And if you look at E.B. White's letters, he talks about how this book could be made into a movie, but you would have to develop, and I can't quote him exactly, but he talked about how you would have to develop a whole new way of animating that was one part animation, one part live animals. So in Charlotte's Web, we see real pigs. We use 40 pigs in that movie, and they have animated mouths, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing that he said was that you would have to, in the movie, you would have to honor the sanctity of the barn. He said the barn is like a chapel. And so those were two very, very important linchpins that then, ahead of the release of the movie, because we spent a lot of time talking to teachers and librarians in particular about this question of faithfulness. So for that movie, we had as an anchor what E.B. White himself had said about the process of adapting this beloved work.
Yeah. So, we try.
question.
Yes.
Fascinated by the whole idea of what can go wrong. I'm really curious about some adaptations that have not worked out very well. And I realize you probably can't speak about anything you yourselves have worked on, but would you be willing to speculate? For instance, I'm thinking, I don't
Sure.
think any of you had anything to do with the Golden Compass.
No.
But is that true?
No, none of us worked on the Golden Compass.
Is this like totally...
I think we can do it without, I think we should do it without, in a general sense, because I think we've all been disappointed. I think we've all been disappointed by adaptations. And I think it's for principles and reasons that we're trying to articulate here. And it's tempting to focus on one, except that I also know, and I think it's fair to say, that everybody involved in any one of these projects is setting out to do the right thing, not the wrong thing. So sometimes it goes awry. And I think it's a combination of, I guess it's source plus vision plus tug of war that's creative, where there's just the chemistry. Every single project, and again in the movie business, is like a gypsy camp that gets set up. It's new, it's often, very often, except for Steven Spielberg and some of the different groups that have worked as one unified production team over 30, 40 years. Most projects bring together people who haven't worked together before, and a studio might change heads in the middle of a process, and they'll say, what is this movie? No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And either the director has the chops to fight back or doesn't. And it's sometimes, I think what you're seeing, my instinct is that when an adaptation fails, it's because there's been a misunderstanding of the source and a tug of war with the source that is not helpful or productive. And again, nobody sets out to do it badly. It's too much money. It's too, especially when you're talking about some of the greatest titles that we've all seen. It's just, I can't say any one project ever that I've ever known of that people went into it and said, let's botch this horribly. But sometimes somebody up at the top might not understand what the project is and might take it and switch it.
So I have a little story about this, which was, and this is, and again, I think part of it is you need to have a champion. You need to make sure that there's that champion somewhere in your team who, and this was a situation where we were working with a Hollywood company, and we had one executive who really didn't understand why, first of all, why George didn't talk, which of course was part of Margaret Ray's will, that he could never talk, but then said, well, can't we make the rest of the animals talk? Because if the rest of the animals talks, we could definitely, it's more commercial, we could do better with it. And, you know, we were pretty unhappy about that idea because it would make George look kind of stupid if everybody else could talk and he could talk.
What's wrong with you?
But it was, and again, this was not like he was like out to ruin the show, but because there was actually at Houghton Mifflin an amazing champion, we were able to push back against that and sort of save the kind of the thing.
You did save it.
It was
by
a
doing
save because, you know, and now I think if you think about what is so great about Curious George, in my mind, one of my favorite things is the fact that George doesn't talk, that he communicates, but he doesn't talk.
Yep.
And so, and if we had, and that wasn't going to change, but if the other animals around him were talking, it would really have,
He'd be a loser.
it would really have changed the way we were looking at the
Absolutely.
show. So I think it helps to have somebody who really can champion it, and it also helps to kind of just keep true to what that essence is.
We
And
had
that can-
executives who were really wanting us to keep Leslie alive at the end of Bridge to Terabithia.
so sad.
No. Sorry, Leslie, no. And, you know, we had, thankfully in that instance, we had Catherine Patterson as a very respected voice in the process. And she was very polite about that. That didn't happen. Yeah,
Questions over there.
yes.
I think in the world of theater, you have a dramaturge who kind of does that with a script. So in the world of publishing and adaptations, who's the person who decides what the source is saying and what's important about it? Is it a team or is there a position?
Can everybody hear her question? Yeah, okay. Who is the ultimate arbiter? Who is the arbiter of the content?
Well, that's a good question because I think it's probably different in every structure. I mean, I happen to love the scripting process. That's one of my favorite things. So I actually serve that function in all of the projects that I work on. There does have to be one person who looks at things and says, that works, that doesn't work, that works, that doesn't work. There's always a head writer who has to be imbued with the vision, and really get it. But they need someone to bounce off of. And there's a team of people around them, but there also does have to be the person who says at the end of the day, no, sorry, can't do that. Keeping and bearing in mind all of that input.
And it does seem to me too that just from, again, my projects are earlier on, but it seems to me that the movies that have been successful and that have been really resonated with their audience have been the ones that have had that champion and that have had a certain amount of author involvement. And
Yeah.
I think that, obviously it has to be the right author who is respectful of the process. And it's one voice among the creativity, but I feel like when the author is brought in that capacity, it acts as a balance because then you get that vision in conjunction.
My favorite example of this is the movie Holes that we made many years ago. And we were very, 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 very fortunate on that project that the fabulous director, Andy Davis, walked in the door arm in arm with Louis Sacker and said, we're a team, we're doing this together. And he was on the set every day. He was respected, he was in the movie. And it was, I think, in my experience,
that.
yeah, he was, I think it's, we remain.
I didn't know he was in the movie.
Oh, it was just a small part. We remain unbelievably proud of that, but partly because it was such a fabulous, first of all, The Source was one of the best books ever written, but it was such a fabulous token of respect that Andy paid to Louis, and I think that showed all the way through the movie. I think there's not one moment in that movie that doesn't reflect the purity of that process. So that's in my own experience, that's the best example I've been involved with. But there are all kinds of examples, but it's so unusual. It is so unusual to have that happen. And it was a testament both to the power, the incredible, what I was talking before about resilient source material, that is unbelievably resilient source material. But it was also brilliant of the director to recognize the creativity of the author and to weave him right into the process. Betsy?
I don't know why I feel like playing devil's advocate, but I'm going to, because
I could tell you were looking
I
skeptical.
She had that
remember
face.
some examples where the authors have said publicly and to me, yeah, that I cashed my check,
Yeah.
I furnished the
Yeah.
source material, and we're done. Simple like that, go make your movie.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very respectful, high-minded process we're talking about here, and sometimes that works that way, and sometimes it doesn't.
Definitely.
And you mentioned that maybe the best movies come out of that. I have not done an analysis of that, so I don't know if I agree with that or not. I think writers write books,
Yeah.
and then what we're talking about here is a whole other process.
It may depend.
Maybe the writer's influence is good, and maybe
I think it depends. Again,
It may depend on the kind of movie too. You know, I feel like maybe there's a sense where if you want a faithful adaptation, if you want to produce a visual version of the book, then having the author's involvement can help. If you want to take the source material and you can create a terrific movie that may or may not have much in common with the source material, but it can be a terrific movie. I certainly can't say that the greatest movies based on books
I
would have
say
been.
that movie is a 2-hour ad for my book.
yeah, well, that is
Great.
almost
I didn't
always
have
the
to do
case.
anything,
That's almost
and-
always the case. Not
Yeah.
always, but almost always, yeah.
And that's that.
That's a big deal. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. With so many book projects out there, so many published children's books, how does a book rise to the top? That is it the number of likes on Facebook? Is it the number of followers on Twitter? Is it reviews? Is it sales? What are the factors that make you say, oh, this book we want to adapt into a television series or into a movie?
How does it rise to notice? How is it noticed? How is it noticed? Well,
Well, I think it's all of those things, and and it's all of those things, and then again, it's also sometimes none of those things. I mean, it's a kind of quirky process for me, which is I do look at what's on the bestseller list, what is what do the librarians tell me kids are reading, what do I see in kids' hands, and then I also think, what do I like? What speaks to me? I mean, I think it's a combination of like a really personal response to things, because I know that I'm going to have to be spending many years of my life on this project,
Right,
and
well,
I
there's
want to
that.
really make
There's
sure
that.
I like it.
There's that.
But so it's a combination. But so I think we do. One of the things we do is we do spend a lot of time saying, okay, let's go. We talk to the children's librarian saying, all right, what's the book that everybody's asking for right now, and and what's your favorite book, and we do that part. And then we look at them and we say, oh, this is really interesting, and then the other part for us is we have to think, okay, it has to also have the capacity to have like a curriculum attached to it. It doesn't have to be like curriculum with a capital C. But it does have to feel like, all right, we're going to be able to give kids social skills as a result of this. We can do math. We have to think about those things too.
and it has to be the book that you don't hide under the pile of
And it
books.
has to be the book that, which does not necessarily mean that it wouldn't be, because sometimes that book that you hide under the pile of books is the one that could be really successful, but it's just, I can't do it.
And then when we look at feature, there's a little bit of a different criteria, which is the term for the night, which you may know or may not know, the Four Quadrants. Does it appeal to all four quadrants? So that's man, woman, boy, girl. And you want to find, and that's the most cynical term, and it's no way to judge a book by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a little bit of a litmus test for will something adapt, because if every single 8-year-old girl in the world goes to see Beezus and Ramona, that would be good, but you need to, you want the mom or the dad or the brother or the somebody to come too. You need to have a substantial audience to pay back the substantial amount of money that the project requires.
You're shifting demographics, though, in this country. Are you taking that into
Yes.
account when you're looking at those quadrants? Because the quadrants 20 years ago are not the quadrants of today, but the
Absolutely.
quadrants of 20 years from now.
Well, yes, there's no, I think it's incredibly exciting what's going on in our country in that respect. I mean, I think there's a long way to go, but I think it's very exciting to contemplate audiences, shifting audiences, new availability of programming that creates new cohorts of audience that are recognizable, that are growing. I'm very excited about that. It actually
Absolutely.
leads me to another topic I wanted to bring up, because another thing that's happening, which I think we're all pretty excited about it, is there's a lot of platform shifting going on, which is also liberating us from that dreaded you know, can't sell it internationally. All these various knowledge-based things that are limiting to film and television projects are really starting to melt away with Hulu, with Amazon, with Netflix, with the proliferation of, there's actually a huge number of other platforms proliferating all the time that are allowing projects to come to life that might never be able to have risen up because of the constraints of the prior ways of looking at how content is delivered and received. We're much more, not back to your question about Facebook, we are much more now able to engage. We can talk about Carol. Carol's recently had an experience with launching, looking to launch a series on Amazon. You can speak to that, because it's pretty interesting what's going on there.
Well, what I would say is actually, I think those platforms, in fact, may be even more driven by those. They're so numbers driven, those platforms. So as much as I would like to think that's true, I'm not actually sure it is true. I think that, you know, there are definitely more platforms, more places to put things, but when we talk to people like Netflix, they're like, okay, we want the most recognizable IP you can bring us. And, you know, when you go through the Amazon process, which we just recently did, and sadly we didn't get picked up, it's all about how many people have watched the pilot, how many people watched more than once, and did we hit their demographic on Amazon Prime? And that, so you know, when we create a series, it didn't quite match with that demographic of who's on Amazon Prime, then that's kind of the mismatch. So I actually think it's great that there are a lot more platforms, and it will obviously open up opportunities, but it does mean that, in fact, you have to actually target more closely to what will be successful for this particular audience.
Roger.
Do any or all of you have some kind of quick stop project that you always wanted to get on the screen and for one reason or another?
Yes.
You're not been able to do so?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Answer nay.
I'm not, I don't want to. I'm sorry. I mean, because there's too many people I care about involved. When there are projects that I'm going to cling to with my last breath to try to make them happen. And I can't say they won't happen. I can say that circumstances haven't lined up so far. No, I don't really want to say it, only because I don't want to say it in public, because, you know, but suffice it to say, if we love something enough, it's not the right thing for everything, but there are some projects that I'm heartbroken we haven't been able to realize yet, that I'm not giving up on, put it that way.
I guess a gentler version of that question would be, do you ever discover along in the process that in fact the book is on film?
Oh, that's a different question, but that's a wonderful question. Well, I sort of was alluding to that before. I mean, sometimes you have to go ahead and make it anyway, because you're all pregnant with it, so to speak. You do, right?
Yeah.
You're just in it, and you're going, wait, let me take a step back. I'm sure there's another way to look at this. I'm sure this can be repaired. I'm sure this can be fixed. I'm sure this, but you can't really. Sometimes the train's left the station. You can't really stop it. It's just going to go. It's a problem. I mean, again, this is, you know, human endeavor. It's human endeavor. It's imperfect. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, you know, there are authors I've been courting for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of them have just turned me down, but some of them have also just are still like, well, it's really interesting. Let me keep thinking about it. You know, every year I call them. They're like, oh, yeah, I'm still thinking. So, again, I have no idea whether those will ever come to pass. You know, what's going to happen first? They're going to finish thinking, or I'm going to be retiring, or whatever. But, you know, I think there are a lot of projects that there's clearly a lot of projects that I would like to do, and there's a lot of new authors that we're discovering, which I'm excited about, and I'm, you know, interested in pursuing those too. But I think it takes so many resources and so much money and so much
so few things
energy
that actually can come to
that
life.
it's for us, we can only really get one or two going.
And I would say the fact that you've got 3 of your projects under adaptation is just, that's
great.
a lot. That's really a lot. because it's, there's just so, even as much as it might seem like there's just a universe of these materials coming out, there really aren't that many, particularly in our children's space.
Well, what I've noticed, again, in my fairly limited experience, is that I think there may be, well, number one, there certainly is much more of a groundswell and an interest in book-to-film adaptations lately. But I think in years past, there may have been a bit more of a scattershot approach to optioning, whereby a lot of options were tossed off very easily, but many of them never made it very far.
Oh, yeah, optioning, yeah.
So it seems to me that maybe either they're being a little more judicious in the things that are optioned, or there's just much more of a market for it, so that the ones that are optioned, at least the ones that I have in my group, they seem to be moving along fairly quickly.
I think YA is pretty fertile right now.
Yeah, it's kind of the hot zone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just seems to me that there's more optioning with intent to develop,
Yeah.
as opposed to, well, let's just go ahead and cherry pick these just in case in the future.
There used to be a gathering of the
and then they just
acorns.
languish for 10 years and nobody else
Oh,
can do
development
anything
hell.
with it. And-
Development hell, yes. Did you want to speak to development hell, Randy?
Well, I wanted to answer your question directly. I'll speak for myself. We have to depict more people of color on the screen. Children, adults. If you watch what happened to Selma at the Academy Awards, I mean, that's a whole other discussion about what the Academy Award is or isn't. But the fact that, I mean, I'll speak for myself, that Selma got the best song. There are many books waiting to be made. Esperanza Rising is waiting to be made into a movie. Monster is waiting to be made into a movie by Walter D. Myers. You saw it just before Walter D. Myers died. There was a full-page article opening up the art section saying, where are the films for kids of color? Where are the characters for kids of color?
And our producer Nikki Silver, who's not here tonight, is
Absolutely.
actually making Monster once she can get the people together. Yeah.
So this is a big, I mean, it's the elephant in the room in Hollywood, is the depictions of people, and I think we are sometimes we're the enemy in this. Is that this is a very, 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 very light industry, and it's going to take, I mean, so 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That's what I would like to do, and I would love us to be involved in those kinds of properties.
Very much so. Very much so. Yes?
I wondered if anyone approached Oprah and Tyler Perry about doing books about children of color. There are, shall we say, large presences in the media business who have the clout
For sure.
to greenlight projects and certainly have a certain sensitivity because that's from their background. I'm saying the media's idea of expanding the people you approach.
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. And, I've been thrilled with Shonda Rhimes's output and Empire. I mean, there's some spectacular projects that I think are going to become, the stupid thing about, the business is once something is successful, everybody's invented it. As far as I'm concerned, in this aspect, that's fantastic. We all want to see that open up. We want to see many more projects with many more, much more diverse opportunities and much more diverse voices for sure. And I think the fact that we've got some very tangible successes in the adult space now is going to help us bring into the children's space. I believe that. Other questions? Yeah.
More from the agency point of view or perspective, I was wondering just kind of what would you say to a writer who their book is either published or about to be published, who's open to those options? Like what kind of realistic expectations do they expect to get or hope for?
My advice would be not to expect anything. Because I think the chances of it, to me, it's just the ones that have happened for my clients have been incidental or they came about as opposed to by design. And I think, and just because there's so many variables and you may or may not get optioned. If you're optioned, you may or may not get produced. If it's produced, you may or may not hate the movie. It may flop. There's so many, publishing is a lot more controllable. You can work on your craft, you can write a terrific book, and there's still an element of luck and timing. But in the end, if you write a terrific book, it will get published. presumably, hopefully. Whereas with film, there's so many other aspects that I think, in a way, it's a little bit of the dream of a lot of authors to have their book made into a film. But I think for most people, it's an unrealistic dream. So I would personally just encourage people to just kind of leave it in the ether. Certainly as you're working with an agent, having an agency that has a relationship with a film sub-agent is helpful, because at least your book is out there, your book is available.
Having a good agent is a good.
That's
a good way to.
Because then you know that you've done what you can do, and beyond that, at least it's in the sphere. And then beyond that, if there's not a lot that can be done, I think, from the author side, unless you are, best friends with some Hollywood moguls.
And I think the point is too that she's making is the best thing you can do as an author is write the best book you can write. Yeah. And just don't think about that other stuff, because it's out of your hands. Any more questions? Yeah.
If someone has a really great idea, just someone who's not in the industry, and says, "Oh, this would be a great movie, and I'd really love to see it hit the screen," what's the first step for that person to get it into the right hands?
Do you have you're saying a script? You're saying?
Well, maybe you write a novel and you think this novel will be so great as a film, and I'd love to see it as a film, but how can I get it into the right hands to start being developed?
Well, I think the thing to think about is there's a kind of a vast array of stakeholders that are each one is a potential point of entry or a potential shutting of a door. So, there's agents, there's film agents, there's producers, there's actors, there are studio executives. I mean, each one of those is a potential entry point. But each one of those has probably got 50 or 60 or 70 other things that they're looking at the same time. Which is not to say it can't happen, but it is to say, I think well, I meant that when I said have a good agent. I think a good agent is a really good door opener, but even the good agent is going to give you the advice this good agent is giving, which is it's a hit or miss proposition. Which is not to say it won't happen, it's just to say don't bank on it. Don't spend that money until you have it. I had an author once call me and say, "Are you guys renewing my option because I want to redo my bathroom?" And we did, and I found out that we were, and it's like she was being very realistic. That's exactly as much as she was going to be. That was right. She got the money, she did the bathroom, and she kind of was like, "I don't care now. Maybe I'll talk to you in 2 years when I need to do my my roof. We'll see how it's going." Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
I have a really specific question for Carol, and I can't resist asking. Do you have anything to do with the program Wishbone, which had such peculiar adaptation issues?
I had nothing to do with that program. And I kind of both loved and hated it. It was one of those funny programs. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Wishbone. It was the dog who told stories, and they
were very faithful adaptations.
They were very
of
faithful,
classics.
but they were also so weird because there were dog actors doing them all. Live action dogs. It was very weird.
Good
But
intentions gone awry.
it was
Oh, I loved it.
it was sort of,
My kids
yeah, it was a very interesting show. Sometimes you think, really?
So I'm my leader Kathy in the back is making a T sign. So we thank you for your attention and your interest, and thank you for coming out. And we hope you'll all be at the next event, which is going to be in May. Is that correct? There's going to be a reprise of. Is it all right to announce this now? Yes. The Fabulous Trivia Night, which was held last year, is going to be reprised this May, and we hope you will all join us for that. More to come. Hundreds of emails.
If they come through.
Yeah.